Good morning, everybody. Happy Thanksgiving. My name is Rich Thomas, former mayor of Mount Vernon. I'm joined by Professor Joe Diaferia. We're live on Yonkers Voice. We are looking forward to talking with everyone about the outcome of the presidential election. We know that President Donald Trump won over Vice President Kamala Harris, and we're now gearing up to see what the next administration has for the country. We're looking forward to receiving your questions, talking through some of these issues, and I'm so happy to be back on Yonkers Voice. It's been a while. The last time I was supposed to come on, I ran the New York City Marathon, and that was in November of 2023. And now we're back a year later, November 2024, and I ran my second marathon. So definitely looking forward to talking with you about that at some point. But wanted to show the hardware of hard work, and to everybody out there that rooted us on, just wanted to say thank you. Don't worry about that. Just want to say thank you so much for all the support. But Professor, the election happened fast. I mean, even though President Trump declared 2 years ago, Vice President Harris essentially she ran a campaign within 100 days. I mean, can you take us back to when President Biden was kind of leading the way, saying he was going to run for president, and then all of a sudden things changed? Like, what happened, and how did President Trump win in your mind?
Okay, well, beginning with, I beg your pardon. Good morning, everyone. Happy Thanksgiving, and thank you to Yonkers Voice for this opportunity, and thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you.
I'm honored to be here. Well, starting with President Biden, I think there was consensus among his administration, his supporters, or his inner circle, that he just wasn't up to running for re-election. And I don't think it's too much to conclude either that the debate back in June, in which he performed so poorly, was really intended to illustrate what everyone had feared. Now, of course, as a result of that, Vice President Harris emerged as the Democratic nominee, backed by President Biden. And I do know that it was met with some cynicism that here she's eventuated as the nominee, and she did not go through the entire primary process, and that evoked some cynical suspicion. Now, as far as the campaign itself, it's puzzling, really, because although one could argue that she did not have the strongest message, there were, and I think anyone would agree, many more reasons to vote against Donald Trump in 2024 than there were in 2020. I mean, not least of which, January 6th, the impeachment that followed, felony convictions, and so forth, and yet that he was able to win, and then to win in each of the battleground states, something that has not happened in any close election since 1988, with George Bush's victory over Michael Dukakis. And not that election was especially close, but it was the first time. This marks the first time since that election that a candidate for either side won in each and every battleground or swing state. So there, it's a troubling outcome, irrespective of what one might think of Kamala Harris or Donald Trump. It's just, it's interesting.
Well, I mean, look, I'll put something into context. I saw a headline the other day where Chris Cuomo voted for former Governor Andrew Cuomo for president. And it reminded me that, about the primary, about how Vice President Harris did not go through a primary. And, my belief is, if there were to be a primary, I believe Governor Cuomo would have been a far better candidate for president than, what resulted in the Democratic nominee, especially the lack of process. And I say that because, through competition, you would have seen that, Governor Cuomo has the infrastructure and the accomplishments to be president.
Sure.
And there's this thing that you pointed to, like there are these undertones in politics, and we've seen it play out from time to time. There's this dark wing, I think, of Democrats where they try to stop and block rising stars within their own party. And I think that somewhat happened to Governor Cuomo.
I absolutely agree.
And I'm very frustrated by this because I believe if there were competition, I believe he would emerge on top, and we would have a President Cuomo as opposed to a President Trump.
Yes, I believe that there were, and forgive me for stating the obvious, but there were political calculations as far as his takedown.
Yeah.
That there were those who wanted to prevent
Him from
Andrew
running.
Cuomo, they wanted to keep him off the national stage, so to speak. And that might even hold true to a lesser extent of his father, where he was being touted as the next Democratic nominee and even the next Democratic president. And then suddenly, boom, he's not running. And so there, and of course, whatever caused Mario to decide not to run for president, it was not the public spectacle that took down his son, but all the same, there were probably powerful political, albeit insidious forces that sought to keep Mario Cuomo off the national stage. And there is a vetting process, and not to sound too conspiratorial or esoteric, but you have the Trilateral Commission, you have the Council on Foreign Relations, you have the Bilderberg Conference, with which few people are familiar, and I think we have to consider also, and just taking it back to Trump for a moment, there's this notion that he is some political outsider who made this miraculous end run around the establishment, but that's just incorrect, because he could not even have become the nominee of the Republican Party had it not been for the countenance or the imprimatur of some very powerful people. And it's entirely possible, or I would even say likely, that those same powerful people, those same powerful forces sought to keep Andrew Cuomo out.
Well, look, these are the types of conversations that require you to have a drink, especially after Thanksgiving, after you had some possible family members over that made your blood pressure rise.
Right.
But what I will say is, if you do need a drink and you want some great food, you got to check out where we are at Dos Marias. It is located at 200 New Main Street in Yonkers. It's near City Hall. I'm telling you, the food here is great. The environment is phenomenal, but the drinks are even better. So come check out Dos Marias when you have a chance, especially when you're thirsty, or you want to, bring the family members that crashed your house yesterday. Bring them here so they can crash the bar. So check out Dos Marias, 200 New Main Street.
Yes, Mr. Mayor, and I second that. The food here is very good, and the service, and it's conspicuously located. Right where I'm looking at City Hall. That is our proximity.
Stone's throw away.
Yeah.
But I'm telling you, come through, and after we have this conversation, we're going to go downstairs and grab a cold one, because we're definitely going to need it, because this conversation is going to get heavy. But as the professor was saying, look, politics, it can't get dirty. And unfortunately, we saw it play out with former Governor Cuomo. And I just wish that, when you look at how the Republicans, they made their choice. They went through their process. Former President Trump won the primaries handily across across the country, and you mentioned that he won in swing states, and that hasn't happened. I read that there were these very calculated campaigns that were being run by various forces in these swing states that spoke about issues of jobs, issues of inflation, issues that reminded people of how difficult it has become, and that may have made some voters not vote. And it's curious that former President Trump even won the popular vote across the country. So the question is, the New York Times did a story about how Donald Trump gained 100,000 votes in New York City, and Democrats lost 500,000 votes across New York City. So it goes to show you that people are frustrated with the way things are, and that disconnect is what former President Trump exploited. So what do Democrats have to actually do? In my view, is do what they say they're going to do, and stop talking about it. And that's something that we can see and feel here on the local level. But I just want to get your feedback on these battleground states where, the campaigns were run in a way that pointed out the problems, and the Democrats did not offer a clear solution. Like, do you think it was a mistake for Vice President Harris to not say what she's going to do specifically, or what was it?
Well, it was a mistake, yes, but taken together with Trump's populist appeals and how, for example, demagogically posing as this great statesman for peace. I mean, that of course is something that he will likely jettison, come January. But it was the populist appeal that to people's really their crassest and most cynical tendencies, really, because people are frustrated. There's no question, and neither side really had any strong solutions. But again, Trump had a more appealing approach or demeanor. It was his persona that voters gravitated to him, and this despite that there were, as I've already stated, many more reasons to vote against him this time around than there were to vote for him.
I saw a news conference where President Trump was with a mother in Texas and Senator Ted Cruz. And the mother basically said, my daughter was murdered by a person that illegally crossed the border, and she didn't hear anything from the White House, she didn't hear anything from Vice President Harris until it became clear that she was doing a press conference with President Trump. And I've participated in many conversations with parents that lost children over the years, be it from the time I was in high school, one of my classmates got taken by gun violence in Mount Vernon, to being mayor, having to literally fight illegal, access to illegal guns, and eventually stopping gun violence in Mount Vernon in 2019. It's not easy, but listening to this mother explain, like, hey, this would not have happened if we would have had a more secure border. What do Democrats say to that? What do you say to that?
Well, what I would say myself, and I don't know that I'm necessarily speaking for the entire Democratic establishment, but the whole migrant or illegal migrant issue is misdirected from the very beginning, because what people are fleeing countries like Mexico and Guatemala is U.S. economic policy. It's something called the Washington Consensus, and any time any political or social formation has emerged in Latin America, or any third world country for that matter, and I don't use the term third world disparaging here, let me be clear about that, but any time...
Emerging economy.
Okay, well, or developing countries, but I mean, these are euphemisms, of course, but any time any such political movement has emerged, the U.S. national security apparatus has dealt with it violently, and these are matters of historical fact. And they're not widely publicized. They don't appear among the mainstream media or even mainstream history textbooks, whatever the heck that means. But for example, the overthrow of Evo Morales, or we can go farther back, the assassination of a democratically elected president in Chile, Salvador Allende, September the 11th, 1973. Here was a democratically elected president killed by the sitting U.S. president at the time, Richard Nixon. Now, the point that I'm making is that these are countries that are trying to emerge from the economic hardship that U.S. economic policy, or Western economic policy more broadly defined, are creating. The U.S., and again, I don't want to say that the American people are responsible, because the American people are largely unaware of what's going on, but Wall Street, the Pentagon, the City of London, they are creating economic conditions from which people in Latin America are trying to escape. And it does seem ironic that they come to the very country whose economic policies are causing them to want to flee, but that is the real issue. That is the real issue. So illegal immigration or illegal migration, personally speaking, and I suspect that I don't speak for the entire Democratic establishment here, but illegal immigrant is a term that does not exist in my lexicon. So, I mean, I have to just leave it there.
Now, well, I'm going to remind everybody, I told you this conversation is going to get heavy, and if you need a drink, you got to go to Dos Marias at 200 New Main Street. You get in Yonkers, you will get the best beverages, adult beverages, and food, because, you know, people are hearing some history from Professor Diaferia, and what I can tell you is, you know, the tariffs that are being floated right now by incoming President Trump to be the 47th President of the United States is something that is going to have some ramifications and consequences on, you know, our economy. But before I get there, I do just want to point out that, you know, a lot of people that are watching this, people out there that are putting together what you're describing in terms of the impact of American economic policy abroad. Once upon a time, there was this, you know, movie that told people about this, and it began with an illustration of Fidel Castro inviting people to flee Cuba to go to the United States. And at the beginning of Scarface, one of the most,
one
of
the most, that was the Mariel boat lift in 1980. Sure.
So the point is, you know, if you look at, you know, a lot of, especially young people today, you know, they watch a movie like Scarface, they see that at the beginning, and they see, you know, that quick historical tidbit about how, you know, this is what happened. You know, Castro did release some of his most notorious people to go and leave Cuba because he didn't want to deal with them.
Right. So that was after President Jimmy Carter said, "Send your people to me," and Fidel, for his part, okay.
He said, "Take them," and that's what happened again this time. So, you know, when President Biden took office and Vice President Harris was tasked with, you know, being the border czar, you know, they sent that message: "Come, the border's open," and 20 million people came, and obviously history repeated itself. So I think that's where Democrats have really lost, you know, touch with reality in the sense that they could have more readily said, look, we're going to have a better process, and we're going to use the best technology to make sure people get through the process. We're going to help the people that are here now online get through that line, get through that process, and then the people that are coming, we're going to work with our neighbors to make sure that it's done orderly, and we're not just going to have, you know, mayhem. So I understand what you're saying in terms of the policies that people are fleeing, but the real problem is it wasn't handled at all. It just they just kind of let the gates down, and that's where, you know, I think the biggest embarrassment was when for years the leadership was saying we need Congress to pass this law, and they did not. And that's what really, I think, frustrated people in these battleground states that are on the receiving end of people coming through their backyards, and they're like, look, you could have easily just said, stop, we're going to put a better process in place, and they simply didn't. So that's where, you know, I think the Democrats, from a party standpoint, have to really reflect deeply on, look, we have to stop these games. People are not, you know, ignorant. They can read, they see things, and they know how they feel. So if Democrats, from a larger standpoint, would just say, look, let's get real, let's be honest, let's deal with the problems head on, offer a more intelligent solution, they're not doing that. And that's where Trump came in and said, look, I'm either going to build a wall or I'm going to send them back. Very simple, plain language. He's going to deal with it. And that answer resonated with people across the country.
Yes. No, you're absolutely correct. And yes, there's no question that something has to be done, and there has to be an orderly process. So I don't think that approach,
right,
and my own attempt to take a holistic view, I don't see that there's dichotomy between the two. That, you know, why not both? And this is something I tried to bring to light when I ran for Congress 12 years ago. That we really have to take a look at our foreign policy, and not just with respect to Latin America, but West Africa, the Middle East also.
We just have a comment from one of our viewers, Donna Nolan. This is what she states: beyond happy, Trump is coming back. I remember meeting Mayor Richard Thomas when he first became mayor after my loss to gun violence, her son. And we should have kept Mayor Thomas as the mayor of Mount Vernon.
Thank you. And sorry for your loss. And And your son, Legislator Nolan, is a phenomenal guy, and I appreciate your comment because, you know, I can only tell you that, you know, look, there's no reason for gun violence to happen in our country, in our homes. And I just want to hand you this, Professor, because that's something that I know would have really gone a long way in Mount Vernon. And that, for people out there watching and wondering what it is, that's an $82 million check that I left behind for the city of Mount Vernon before I left office. And the issue with that is, for some reason, the incoming administration, or the administration that came after me, did not cash that check. It was $50 million up front for the city and $30 million to build a fiber network for the city. All homes would have access to fiber. The school district got $20 million out the deal. It resolved all of Mount Vernon's financial problems. But when you said that when there's a movement and there's an economic uprising per se that changes things, you get this counter reaction that tries to stop it.
May I take this?
Absolutely.
Thank you. Thank you.
And I have some more for you too. But my thing is, like, you know, I know for a fact that the current mayor of Mount Vernon rejected this deal, and it doesn't make any sense because we're now paying Verizon and other providers millions of dollars to provide the same services when we could have rented it to them. And so when I think about what you're saying about the policies, and I think about the economic consequences of rejecting a $50 million check just to have as, you know, for your fund balance, why would you do that? And it goes back to what you're saying, like, why would the policies drive people out? It's because you got people that make decisions that work against the public and the people. So how it applies to President Trump coming in, I mean, look, people are exhausted and people are frustrated, and I can only tell you that from traveling and listening to people that we're going to need to identify what are our top priorities. And I know that housing is one of the biggest priorities that America has. We're going to have a real problem with technology in terms of AI disrupting jobs just for drivers. You know, it's really important, I think, that on the local level at least, the response could be to put in some real restraints on AI. At the end of the day, if there's a way to send a message to Elon Musk about robot taxis, is to say, you know, they're not either welcome or they're not going to be permitted without such a higher price, because you have to find a way to protect that local job until we fully understand the impact and ramifications. I'm all for, you know, advancement, but I'm not for job displacement. And we feel it now on our energy bills with Indian Point. Indian Point closing drove electric bills, heating bills in this region through the roof. And I'm a big proponent of nuclear power, always have been, but I say that to say we have a real example of losing an economic engine in Indian Point, and those jobs were never replaced and our bills went up. So if we allow the same to happen now, right, these tariffs go up and then all of a sudden here come the robots, what are people going to do? So locally, I think there needs to be a real response, and I hope Democrats are paying attention to this, because that's why we need to, you know, have a stronger answer to the problems that people face.
Yes, and I agree with respect to AI, that now it's at the point where we could call, you know, whomever. I mean, even a lawyer's or a doctor's office, and we can never be 100% sure if we're speaking with an actual person or AI prompts. Never mind what we're experiencing in academia. That it's in the past year and a half, I have not failed one single student for uncorrected plagiarism, and not that I want to penalize students for plagiarism, but I know that in so many instances they're just going into Perplexity or ChatGPT and they're asking, write me a term paper, 5 pages, sources on this topic, and boom, it's done in a matter of minutes, if not seconds. So I do share your concern with respect to AI, because it is, certainly displacing human beings. And then, of course, when we have to speak to a representative, whether it's a company or like again, a law office. I had to, I spoke to, or I should say I contacted a law office in Yonkers, whom I will not name, after my mother passed 3 years ago, and at no time was I convinced that I was speaking to the attorney himself.
Right.
And what might typically happen also, I had a dispute with a local cable company. We had a service call, the service representative did not show up, and then they tried to charge me for the missed appointment. Anyway, and I know that when they finally got back to me, this was not a live person whom I was speaking to, as authentic as it may have purported to be. And if I can speak to Indian Point, yes, one can be a proponent of nuclear power, but I think the issue surrounding nuclear, Indian Point in particular, was the geographic sensitivity of that location. That it was built right near a geological fault. We have had earthquakes in this region, October 19th, 1985, and then April 5th of this year. So that was the major concern, the propensity for...
I hear the earthquake threat, but Indian Point was built into a rock, and it was designed to withstand an over 10, close to a 10 magnitude. If there were a 10 magnitude earthquake, everything would be flat.
Well, of course.
So the point is, we can split hairs on Indian Point.
Right. No.
And I agree with you that there were issues raised about it, but today nuclear power is needed. You know, there's nuclear X-rays in your dentist's office, so you get exposed to more radiation by eating a banana. So I know for a fact that nuclear power is essential for America, and that's one of the biggest job creators that we're going to need. We need people to really focus on how we can replace our old housing stock, how we can retrofit homes, but also create more access to electricity. We have another question?
Yes, we do have another question, and the question is about tariffs.
Tariffs. Yep.
Lots of people in the States, around the States, outside of the States, are not understanding the total concept of what tariffs are. Who gets impacted by it? The country that's exporting, the country that it's importing, or the consumers of those countries?
So on the tariffs, and I'm going to ask the professor to weigh in, but briefly, you know, right now it feels like Trump is using this moment with respect to tariffs to renegotiate and reset relationships between America, Mexico, Canada, but ultimately to put China in check. And I believe that what President Trump is doing with the tariffs is sending a message to China mainly that you're going to stop sending poison over to kill Americans. You're going to stop sending this fentanyl and pink cocaine. You're going to stop it, and we are going to take it out on anyone and everyone that helps get it in. So I firmly believe that, you know, for the families that are dealing with drug addiction in various places around the country, he's taken a firm stand against that, but it will have some economic impacts that I'll let the professor talk on and I'll add to it.
Well, he's also, I mean, well, first of all, that does affect the consumer because we're of course going to be paying the difference. But Trump is, and let's be frank here, there is a ruling class here in the United States, and yes, I'm taking a structural or a systemic approach here, but they don't always speak. In fact, they seldom speak with one voice. And Trump, for his part, he is, shall we say, affiliated with a component of that ruling class that wants to, or that seeks to prioritize China as the initial target of the Brzezinski Doctrine. And that is the conquest of that entire Eurasian landmass. And when we say fentanyl and illicit drugs, and not to dismiss those issues, but all too often those are used just to as rallying points, really. That of course the establishment is not going to tell the whole of the American population what the actual U.S. strategy is. So other issues have to be created or emphasized, like drugs. And we, even going back to the 1980s, when the U.S. was targeting Nicaragua, Reagan, for his part, they allow free access to drug dealers and they're shipping drugs, which was a complete lie. And I'm not I'm not stating in the most absolute terms that that there are no illicit drugs or what have you coming out of China, but it is really part of a larger geopolitical strategy that the U.S., or the U.S. ruling class, more specifically defined, is seeking to dominate that Eurasian landmass because of the hydrocarbon reserves, that is to say, oil and natural gas and mineral resources. And this is stated U.S. policy, the Brzezinski Doctrine, among others. And we needn't speculate. So yes, it is a matter of keeping China in check, but not for the reasons that many have stated, that it's illicit drugs or that these same drugs are coming out of Mexico. So these are real issues, but of course we cannot expect our government or our media to be forthcoming or candid about the actual motives.
Now, Mayor Thomas, you're talking about blaming China for the fentanyl, Mexico possibly, but what about blaming the country that has the root cause of those problems, the consumer, those that are actually consuming those drugs? The demand is from here, and they are just fulfilling that high demand. Why don't address those problems? And if you do, then you avoid the fentanyl from coming in.
That's a good point, and I will say, when I was mayor, I had to deal with the exact issue, and the response was to compete with the drugs. And what did we do? We found a way to engage seniors, the school district, kids, and we gave them things to do that competed with gangs, guns, and drugs. So over time, it worked. In 2019, no person was killed by a handgun in Mount Vernon. And when you look at the programs and how it was all connected, it was designed around after-school programs, intervention, connecting seniors with different types of activities so that their wisdom could be passed on. So now I'm speaking broadly and as quickly as possible, but I want to point out that yes, you can have strategies to interrupt and disrupt drugs, but addiction is still a disease that needs to be met with all types of solutions like the common cold. So I can only assure you that when you have a robust and rigorous attack to compete with drugs, the attention that it gets and how it sneaks in through different platforms, you just have to be on top of it, and you have to invest in it. And that's where and why I'm really troubled with the direction Mount Vernon has gone since I left. But I do have hope now that there's a focus on drugs coming back. I think the federal government will invest in those programs to try and stop addiction. And as the federal government moves more and more in that direction, I do hope that communities like Yonkers, Mount Vernon, Westchester County really goes and leans into it so that we don't have addiction in the homes and addiction that are harming families.
And Mayor, you're correct to refer to addiction as an illness and not a character flaw. So yes, you're
Thank you.
Here we have a statement from J. Ray Jones Jr. He says, "Here is the fact. China, among other countries, have ripped us off, especially China, who seems to have hold on most of our products. President Trump is looking to tilt the scales in America's favor, and there is absolutely nothing wrong with that." Either one of you wants to address that?
America needs jobs. America needs to make things again, and that's something that I believe. Speaking about Mount Vernon remains an industrial powerhouse. I mean, we're the only city that has a huge industrial zone. But I can assure you that America needs to get back in the business of making things again. So I agree with the approach of bringing jobs, industry back, so people can work. I do want to just hedge it with, we have to watch technology and AI. We can't have Elon Musk run rampant and say, all right, we're going to replace all taxi drivers with robots. That's not the way we should be going. We shouldn't be rushing into it. We need to find a smoother transition and get high schools and colleges prepared to have the next generation of workers skilled to do jobs of the future. What is that? Engineering, building power plants, building factories where it does require some human involvement, not just 3 people like Spacely Sprockets on the Jetsons. We need to have work for the next generation. If we don't have people working, we're going to have much larger problems in the future. So I understand the move that Trump is doing. I embrace it. I just want it done with a scalpel and not an axe, so that we don't wind up causing more harm than good. So the recent talk that President Trump had with the president of Mexico, I thought that was productive. It was a sign that said, look, we're not going to just run off with a 25% tariff. We're going to have a dialogue. And if I see some progress on your end, we won't erect that tariff and throw out, our mutual agreement to do trade just because, he's not getting his way. So I think, again, that's said to me that deals are being done. There's a reset, and I'm hoping that the economics can work in a way that, people are not forgotten. People are put to work.
Sure. First of all, you mentioned the Jetsons. I didn't think you were old enough to remember the Jetsons. But yes, I agree that there has to be an emphasis on returning or restoring production here in the United States. China, for its part, is on track to eclipse the United States in economic power. They're about to become or to replace the United States as the world's largest economic power. And ideally, and again, I'm speaking philosophically, that there shouldn't be such a competitive dynamic to begin with. But of course, you, Mr. Mayor, and I have no control over that. Right. But I think what is key also, allow other countries, and I'm not referring to China specifically, but just countries in general, whether we're talking Latin America, the Middle East, West Africa, South Asia, allow countries to develop their own economies, measure their own prosperity without either China or the U.S. or Russia meddling. There's so much talk of this being a global economy. Well, fine, let's accommodate that. Let's allow other societies to thrive. Yeah. Now, if I can just mention something just parenthetically with regard to China, there's still, I think, a recurring notion that China is still somehow a communist or a socialist country. Now, they call themselves the People's Republic of China. They can call themselves whatever they want. I can call myself a vampire, but that doesn't make it so. Mm-hmm. They are governed or ruled, however you want to characterize it, as by a vanguard party that calls itself the Communist Party. But in reality, in practice, they have not been socialist since, well, the beginning of their reversion to capitalism began in 1976. So to say that, and not that anyone in this dialogue has said it, but there's an idea that China is somehow still communist or socialist, and that's just not the case. Well, they are in every sense a capitalist country, no matter their pretensions or what they may call themselves.
I mean, look, it's about power, right? So China wants to be the most powerful. America is the most powerful. And right now, as we look ahead and we look back, America made a decision to do a course correction, and America chose strong leadership, and that's not only what Mount Vernon needs, but the country needs it. And I can assure you that, the positions that President Trump has taken is taking a stand that he believes in America, he believes in America first, and there are some policies that we didn't get a chance to discuss today that I know I don't agree with as a father of a daughter. I believe women should be in control of their own bodies. In this Project 2025 dynamic, there are lots of things that are put into question whether or not they will exist. Maybe we can have a follow-up on this in the near future. We can explore what Project 2025 is. Love to kind of talk with everyone about it. But I do know that there are elements of Project 2025 that would make Democrats in Mount Vernon say, you know what? Maybe we need to do that. And when you look at, and I'm just going to localize it to Mount Vernon for a moment, you look at the tax situation, you look at the school district, and you look at the things that have happened over the past several years where it's just gone backwards. I just gave you an $82 million check. Mount Vernon rejected it. This administration that's there now, why would they go backwards? Why would they turn it away? They even met with the person. I brought a picture to show everybody. So I can assure you that this $82 million that was left behind is very real. But for some reason, everybody's caught up on the problems that we have. So when a Project 2025 comes forward and says, look, we need to hit the reset button on the education department because they're wasting money, taxpayers in Mount Vernon will say, you know what, that may not be a bad idea because the school district and the city are at odds, and when we were talking about this, it was ignored. And that's the deeper problem that I think a lot of Democrats around the country are asking. How come those at the very top are looking the other way? Why did big Democrats look the other way on people that really need help, kids in my community? So I'm still passionate about this because I'm not only living there, I'm raising my family there, but I'm also paying the bill, and it hurts. So as we get to wrap this conversation up, I do look forward to having a follow-up, hopefully here at Dos Marias.
Absolutely.
200 New Main Street in Yonkers. But Professor, like, you know, the fight is real. And I know that President Trump may not have been the first selection of Democrats, but I do know that Governor Cuomo would have been a far better candidate. I stand by that. I do think that Governor Cuomo could have beat President Trump in an election for president. But we'll see what Governor Cuomo does in New York City if he decides to run for mayor. We're watching that very closely.
That's interesting. I mean, to my knowledge, he doesn't hold New York City residency.
Oh, he does. He lives in Manhattan.
Okay, no, all right. You would know better than I would.
So
Incidentally, I didn't see whose photo you.
Oh, this photo is of Mayor Sean Patterson.
Okay. No,
with Darnell Sutton.
Okay, from my vantage point, I
you
couldn't see
it. Yeah, so this is a photo from 2020.
Oh, okay.
Where this gentleman, he's the one that gave the $82 million check with Morgan Stanley, Crown Castle, Corbell Communications. These are big companies. They were ready to put in a fiber network in the city, and the city said no. I don't know why. I don't know why.
I was going to ask why.
I don't. You have to ask her that because now we're crying poverty and we are broke because of the bad decisions that were made. But I just want to make it clear when people, put information out and they say, "Oh, we have this, contract to pay." It was paid for. Everything was paid for. The whole operation was laid out, and I know I left Mount Vernon in a much better place than I found it. And that's where I'm just questioning our country in the direction we're going, and I'm looking at this pivot that's being made with President Trump. And I do hope that the tariffs are, for right now, talk on Mexico and Canada. I do hope that they do, put China in check so that we can make sure that America maintains its economic prominence and its dominance. Because that's who I am. I'm an American first, and I do hope our country wins.